Alex, how's it going?
It is going great.
That felt too aggressive.
Yeah, it was a little aggressive.
Alex! Please don't yell at me. It's good to have you in studio.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here.
What were you doing? Were you visiting family? Or?
Well, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, so I think that's like a 2-hour drive from here. So usually I combine these with a family trip, so I'll get to go see the nephews this weekend, which will be nice. And then I was joking, I've been to Steubenville like 2 or 3 times in the last 2-3 weeks. I was with Dr. Hahn doing some recording, so super excited for that. But yeah,
and you're
it's a beautiful place.
What?
Is it? Well, it is. It is. There's beautiful masses.
No one says that.
Awesome.
No one usually comes to Steubenville is like, wow, the beauty is just overwhelming.
No, the masses at the university are amazing.
Yeah.
It brought me to tears.
Yeah, the campus is beautiful for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely a rundown town, but there's beautiful elements and beautiful people.
Yeah, plus the studio is awesome. So you've done a great job.
Thank you. And now, are you based in Chicago now?
Yeah, we're based in Chicago. We started essentially 2.5 years ago or so, and we really only had a team for the last 1.5 years, which was all COVID. So
and we're talking about the app Hallow for those at home.
Definitely.
So 2 years ago you founded that?
Yeah, 2.5 years ago or so. It's probably, I never update that number, so it's probably 3 now. But but we're all, at least like half the team or so is now in the Chicago area. But we've got to find a place to get together and all that jazz now that COVID is hopefully getting back to normal. So yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to asking you more about that. Because it's super interesting to me when you find these successful companies, like how they started and how they grew. But
the good Lord is the short answer. But we screw things up and he fixes it most of the time, and that's how it tends to go. But yeah,
good stuff. But then you've also had something of a conversion throughout your life. You used to be maybe agnostic. I'm not sure if you'd say you were an atheist.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe just lead us through that a bit. Were you raised Catholic?
Yeah, I was. So the short version of the story, I was, and I'm sure we'll dive into all the different pieces of it, but so I was raised Catholic by my saint of a mother who dragged me to Mass, and that's about the extent to which I engaged with my faith. I fell away pretty much at whatever the age of reason, but through most of high school and college, I would have called myself atheist or agnostic. Probably agnostic for most of it, but if you really pressed me, I probably would have said there's no God.
Was this because of the new atheist craze at the time? Like, what year was that?
Yeah, it was definitely a part of it. I mean, I guess there were probably 2 or 3 big things. The one was, like, philosophically, the Dawkins Harris stuff. I never really engaged with that to any serious extent, but it was just most of my friend group was just the overwhelming philosophy of, hey, we can trust science. We know science is trustworthy. And math and all that good jazz stuff that gives us our phones and airplanes and stuff. But everything else is kind of this stuff that we've just believed because we couldn't explain anything or just because our parents used to believe it or any of that stuff. And so that was the overwhelming philosophy, which probably came mostly from Dawkins, Harris, those kinds of folks. And then, so that was the one thing philosophically, but I never really got super deep into it when I was falling away. The second thing, most of my friends were just, it was a public school, so nobody really took their faith seriously at all, and most people ascribed to that type of philosophy if they ever talked about it. So that was definitely a decent piece of it. And the last thing was probably just a sense of rebellion that any teenager or young adult has of, hey, I'm not going to do this thing that my parents did just because they're trying to make me do it all the time. They have no reason to believe it. It's all just a bunch of, there's no big guy sitting up in the sky who's judging us or any of that jazz. There's no evidence for that. So that it was, I never really engaged with it heavily when I was falling away, but it was kind of just the common path it felt like to of my friend group and philosophically to not take faith seriously.
Now you've said fallen away twice, but then earlier you said when you hit the age of reason, you kind of stopped believing. So how did you fall away? Like, was it something you adopted and engaged with as a child as you were growing up before high school, or no?
Well, I mean, my mom led me through the sacraments, and I was part of the parish. I was an altar server and all this stuff because I was made to. So I was part of, and I would go to Mass every week because that was what I had to do. But I don't know if I ever, and it was probably around, early high school that I started actually engaging with it, or actually started thinking and saying, hey, this isn't for me. And
was it the philosophical stuff, or was it the morality stuff, or just the obligation? You got to go to Mass on Sunday?
Yeah, it was mostly the philosophical stuff. Okay. And there was a piece of the obligation that was rebellion, but it was mostly the philosophical side was, hey, there's no evidence for this, and I trust things with evidence. I ended up being an engineer in college, and so it was like, hey, I can trust physics, I can trust these, which again, I'll get into all the reasons why I discovered or started to discover that these thoughts were wrong. But there's no evidence. There's no like physical. I can't like go call God or whatever it is I thought at that point. Now we're doing a prayer app, so I think you kind of can. But yeah. So the core of it at the beginning, philosophically, was, hey, there's no evidence for this. I trust science. I know what science is. I know what physics is. And those are the things that I'll believe. There's no evidence for this, so I'll probably call it agnostic. Maybe if I had evidence one day, then I would believe. But for now, there's no evidence, and I don't believe things without evidence. And the thing is, I never really questioned, and I guess we'll get into this, but this started at least on the intellectual side. There were two kind of paths that started. The one was intellectually, and the other was spiritually. The spiritual one ended up being considerably more important to me and transformative. But the intellectual one, at the beginning, I never really questioned any of the assumptions that I had on why can you trust science. And so it was less of a convincing that Christianity was true, at least at the beginning, and more of a questioning of, well, how do you know science is true? Like, how do you have any knowledge at all? And breaking down, I was lost for like a good chunk of months where I just didn't know anything was real. Yeah. And that piece to
college
me,
at that point?
yeah, it was kind of end of college, early career. Okay. It was probably mostly after college. But there was a couple classes in college. There was one philosophy of science one. Yeah. I got into like David Hume and the problem of induction and all that jazz. And that really broke me down with a bunch of I had never really analyzed, okay, well, why do I actually trust science? Yeah. Why do I actually trust math and the things that I think that I can believe? And what does evidence even mean? Which I can get into the problem of induction and deduction and all that fun jazz. But that piece towards the end of college really started to say, okay, I don't really know what I believe now at all. And then after college, it was much more, okay, I've got to try to figure out, I'm an adult now, I'm supposed to be an adult. I got to figure out what I actually believe. So that was kind of the beginning of that piece of that journey.
Interesting, yeah. How did your mom take it as you were falling away from the faith?
My sisters, I have three sisters. We joke that of any of the people in the world, my mom definitely would not have guessed that I would be the person to start a Catholic prayer and meditation app. That would be the exact opposite, which I think gets to the point, because I get the question a lot from, we have a ton of moms who use the app, or people whose kids have fallen away from their faith, or who identify as agnostic or atheist or any of that stuff, of like, what can I do to help my kid or my son or my daughter not fall away from the faith? And it just goes, I think my mom's story is a great example of, you just have no idea what God's plan is. Yeah. And so you might stress and be worried for, 8-10 years, whatever it is, that their kid doesn't take their faith seriously. But you have no idea what God is planning for them, right, and just letting go and trusting. But yeah, I mean, she did not, she's just a super holy woman. She just studies scripture. She does Bible study all the time, and she just lives a really beautiful life.
Does she use your prayer app now?
She does. She is actually it's hilarious, because praise be to God, we have a ton of folks using the app now. I think like 150,000 or so ish every month, 200 ish. Wow. And she is always the first person to catch any bug ever. And so I get texts at like 5 a.m. that say, hey, the Daily Gospel, this audio clipped at the wrong point or whatever it is, or the Daily Gospel seems screwed up. And it's like, man, we had a whole team of people check this before, and then it went on and like 20,000 people listened to it, and my mom is the first person to text me. But yeah, so we joke she's our head of quality control. Yeah. No, we luckily Hallow has been successful enough so my wife and my daughter and I can live outside of my parents' roof, and so that is my payment to her. That's what I joke. We don't have to live at home in the basement. So yeah.
So okay, you said as you're getting older, you've decided I need to kind of figure out what I believe. Why was that the case? Why couldn't you just say, look, there's no evidence for any of these religious claims, so I'm going to go on living a secular life the best way I know how?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Without fully committing to atheism.
Right.
Why not just not buy into anything and just...
Well, I think the first thing is all the things that I thought I knew were big question marks then at that time. So I thought I could trust science. I thought I could trust reason. I thought I could trust math. And all these things now, I had this big question mark in my mind of, I don't know what I believe at all. I think the big two pieces there, I think really was the problem of and this is going to get me into a rabbit hole, I'm sure, but the problem of induction by Hume. But it just is, hey, just because everything happens, you drop a pen to the table and it happens 1,000 times in the past, or it happens for 1,000 years and you record it exactly the same. There's no evidence, there's no reason to believe that that's going to continue to happen. And that rationale is just taking as an assumption that the world is intelligible, that cause and effect is a thing that actually is true, that we're interpreting the world in a real way. And so there's no way for you to know, like I have 1,000, and Hume uses the example of
billiard ball?
No, the black swan is the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
But every swan in the world was white. So the rule was all swans are white. And they'd seen thousands and thousands of swans, but you have no idea what the denominator is because they hadn't, you had 1,000 swans in the numerator that were all white. So you thought all swans were white, but nobody had ever been to Australia. And there was a black swan that they found. And so it proved it wrong. And when you take that and you extend it to time, it's like, well, we've got the last 1,000 years of time that has passed by, but we don't know if that's representative of 1% of all time or 90% of all time or 95%. So we have no idea if the laws of physics or any of the evidence that we've gathered so far is going to continue to be true into the future without making some jump. And the same thing is true with deduction or logical reasoning or any of that jazz. It's like, yeah, it feels true, it feels valid. And I'm not a philosopher by any means, but it feels like, when you say if all walls are white and this is a wall, then it must be white. Like logically valid statements feel true.
Yeah.
But you kind of just take that as an assumption that truth exists. And so you can't do any of the scientific reasoning, you can't do any of the mathematical reasoning, you can't do any of the physics reasoning without some axioms. And even Harris, when you really dive into some of the new atheists, that's the intellectual side of, hey, truth exists. And on the morality side, you have to take some assumption, you have to start from some axiom. And even Harris says, okay, suffering is bad is the assumption that I'm going to start with. Like there's the two worlds of suffering, one with maximum suffering and one with minimum, and I choose to go towards this one.
Yeah, I can see that with deduction, right? Because even in deduction, the premises, in order for it to be a good deductive argument, just have to be more plausibly true than their negation. But we're not actually 100% sure all the time or ever on these premises. So if I say all men are mortal and Socrates was a man, well, the only reason I think I know all men are mortal is kind of from induction.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could see why that would get inside your head and be like, yeah, I guess I can't make any of these leaps.
Well, even the very fundamental base of deduction is like, how do you know that something is logically valid means that it's true? What does that even mean? What does truth mean in a world where you don't have faith or some base assumption? And when you really get to the I didn't ever do super advanced mathematics, but in engineering you get decently far. But you have these really root axioms that you just have to take that start the equation and then start the proof. And so you can't jump from nothing to you can't jump from nothing to an argument. You have to assume, hey, there's some truth somewhere. And to your point, deduction, you can try to prove by saying, well, it's worked a bunch of times in the past. Like math seems to work, engineering seems to work. I flew here on a plane and it didn't fall out of the sky. That seems to work. Blows my mind every time that a giant metal thing can fly. But it seems to work. But then you say, okay, well, just because it's happened a bunch of times in the past, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. It's like, well, I can expect it then to continue into the future. Why? Because there's some consistent thing underlying the world. It's like, well, that's a really weird thing to say. What evidence do you have for that? And so anyway, I got decently deep into this kind of the philosophy of science stuff on both induction and deduction, which are really the only two ways of thinking or reasoning. And you can't prove either, and you can't use them to prove each other because it just turns into a circular argument. You can't use induction to prove induction. Like science is real because it's been true in the past. It's like, well, you just use induction to try to prove induction. That's a circular reference. So anyway, I was sitting there and this was on the intellectual side, very much lost and thinking, well, hey, I thought that my parents, this whole faith thing, nobody had any reason to believe any of this faith stuff. But now I'm starting to think, well, I have to make some leaps just to believe anything, just to think, just to have science or math or any of that stuff, my job, engineering, any of that. And so then the question is, okay, what jumps do you make? And the two big jumps were that truth exists, that there's something that is true, and then the next jump you have to make is that the world is intelligible or you can reason through it in some way.
Quick question, because Augustine addressed that. Why think that it's a leap to say truth exists, since to deny it is to prove it? Why can't this just be one of these? Obviously, it's axiomatic, but it also seems self-referentially incoherent to say that truth doesn't exist, because I've just made a claim to knowledge.
Well, yeah, that's the same type of thing as true relativism, which was I mean, even what you just said there, like the argument that you used was using some sort of logical argument to say, hey, because that's logically incoherent, it's then not true. But you based it off of like, I trust whether something is logically coherent or not as an indicator of whether it's true. For me, it's just this, and even the fact that I never even got to that level of depth of like, well, is what I'm even thinking about true? What does truth even mean? But it was just like, okay, I would listen to a bunch of people's arguments that would prove or disprove different things, but to get anywhere productive, you had to start with some assumption. You had to start somewhere. You couldn't just start in the void.
Or even your own sort of cognitive ability to discern what is right and wrong. Like, that's something you have to assume. You're epistemologically capable of making statements about the world. Like, maybe you're insane and don't know it. Yeah. And so what seems true to you, what you say is true, could be rubbish.
Yeah. So and one of the philosophy folks one of the early teachers I had in some of the theology courses or philosophy courses was, one of the big assumptions you've got to make is that there is truth and that the world is intelligible, that like we are capable of understanding the world with our own reason, which is a very strange thing to say too. There's no real proof. Why would our way of thinking be indicative of understanding the world? That doesn't, it just, we got lucky that we happened to evolve in a way, or that was like self-protective or evolution or any of that jazz. And, it is the big problem with relativism that you were pointing at, which is like, if I say, hey, whatever's right for you is right for you, and whatever's right for me is right for me, and then the other person says, or you were to say, well, I say what's right for me is what's right for you, and you just said I'm right. So that whole thing is circular. But I was caught up in the whole relativism is true. Like, everything's relative. There is no real truth. And when you try to reason anything, like science or math or any of that stuff, from there, you just get lost. You have no footing to jump from. And so, and both on the intellectual side, which is the truth side, but also on the moral side, which is, the love piece. And that I guess, the big thing for me there, Michael Himes has a book, Doing the Truth in Love. It's pretty much just like Theology 101, but it just opened my mind to a whole world of Christianity that I had never thought existed, which was, hey, if you boil everything down to its basic definition, or it's the least, I think his words were, least incorrect definition, God is love. And let's just start there. And I was like, oh man, that's it. Or God is truth. You can start at those two things. And I was like, man, I was just thinking about that truth thing for a long time, which is you have to take some assumption that there's something out there to start thinking at all. And truth, that there is truth. There's a bunch of other things you've got to make, a bunch of other leaps. But truth for me was one that was like, yeah, okay, I have to assume there's some sort of truth, that I'm working towards something, either scientifically or mathematically or any of that jazz, that there is something out there that I'm interpreting correctly. And on the love side, it was like, well, yeah, the whole atheist thing I grew up in was, well, yeah, it's just chemicals reacting in your brain, and that's what love is. And it's just, it just happened because of evolution. It doesn't actually mean anything. And that's a really sad way. There's no real proof for that, that there's no, that love doesn't matter. And to talk about anything morally, just like Harris does, you have to pick some assumption, like suffering is bad or love exists or any of that stuff. And so I was left at this kind of, well, all the knowledge I had before is, I'm now questioning all of these things. Truth and love are the two big things that if I were to jump into a world and say, hey, I need to pick two things to hold on to, what are those two things? And I don't really have any evidence or reason to believe anything. I can't even use those words anymore. So I could pick a world where love doesn't mean anything or love doesn't matter, or where truth doesn't exist and I just lose my mind. Or I could pick a world where truth matters and the work that I'm doing matters, and we can the world is intelligible, and where love matters, and I'm willing to die for my family, and that's important, and that actually matters, and that's like the most important reason that I live. And so to live in a world where love doesn't matter seems like a sad world to live in. But that all got me.
Can I push back? Because because we have atheist listeners, and I want to be fair to them, just because I can explain how something works, why does that have to undervalue it? Like, we maybe once thought that stars were the holes to heaven, and now we know that's not the case. It doesn't make them any less magnificent. And maybe you can explain love as a chemical reaction, but even if you can explain it that way, why think it's any less beautiful? Obviously, atheists who believe that are still willing to die for their families, and being an atheist doesn't commit you to epistemological relativism. You can still say, I can know certain things about the world, and I'm just not going to make a claim about those things that I have no access to. Does that make sense? I mean, for you, that wasn't where you were at, but...
Well, that actually gets very much to my point, which, or the point that I went to next, which, so I got somewhat convinced intellectually by this truth and love piece. But then I would listen to Dawkins and Harris, or that argument there, and I'd be convinced the other way. So whoever I listened to last, I was convinced
I love that honesty. That's really cool.
I'm not the theological or philosophical bulb. And the thing that, and a bunch of people have said this, in a handful of different places, but it was like, you can either be right and win an argument, or you can just be out-argued. And so I started reading C.S. Lewis and all these folks on the Christian side, and I was like, man, this is really convincing stuff. This is really awesome stuff. I started diving into Christianity, and really the only unlock there was, hey, there's actually people who are considerably smarter than me. I could barely understand like a couple lines from Aquinas.
Sure.
And that have thought through this. And there's people on the other side who are also way smarter than me, who, if I got into an argument with either of them, I would lose. And they get into arguments with each other. And so then I'm in this world where it was, well, I don't want to just believe whoever the smartest person I most recently listened to was. And that's what I felt like I was doing. I would read a book by C.S. Lewis, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm absolutely, whatever he is, I'm that. And then I'd read a book by Harris, or I'd watch a Harris talk, and I'd be like, well, no, I'm absolutely convinced by Harris. And then I'd watch like a Harris and Craig debate, and I'd be like, oh, now I have no idea what I believe.
Like a ping pong ball,
yeah, it's
right?
just, gosh, I don't know who won that. It's just they're both making really good, solid points. And so it just felt like this. But that was a really important step for me. It definitely was not, and I could never say, hey, look, theologically, these are the proofs for God. This is why you would believe in it. But for me, what it was this is, at least there's a door. Like, there's some smart people who have thought about this. It's not just all the parents doing this and have been doing it for all time because they're supposed to. There's actually reasons for both. And there's a legitimate debate that you're probably not ever going to understand the fullness of the depth of. But there is some crack to there's both of these paths intellectually made sense, or could make sense. And that was the big thing for me. It was never like, oh, now truth and love exist and I'm making this jump, and now Jesus. And then I could never go through that, like a Trent Horn argument or any of that stuff from beginning to end. And so the big next thing that happened, that was kind of the intellectual half of the journey. The big next thing that happened was I again went back to like science and engineering first principles. And I was like, well, the reason I like science is because you can see things, you can experience things, and you can prove or disprove things, are the way that things are. And that seems like a really easy and obvious way to figure this stuff out. And so I was thinking about religion, and I was thinking about faith. And this is, again, kind of in parallel to a spiritual aspect of this journey. And so it's a more complicated story to this, but I started thinking, okay, I have no idea really what I believe still. At least now intellectually, actually I was more confused because intellectually now there were more options than I thought before. But I thought, okay, if this whole Christianity thing is true, or if this whole God thing is true, is there any way for me to try to prove this at all? And again, I don't think this is the most like what you feel in certain situations is the right evangelization argument for anybody. So I don't extend this to anybody, but this is my own experience. And it was the one thing that I always thought was crazy. One of the craziest parts, there's a bunch of crazy parts, but one of the craziest parts was that as a part of Christianity, you are supposed to be able to, if God exists and is a personal God, you're supposed to be able to essentially pick up your phone, like I joked about before, and call him every day and ask him what you're supposed to do. And that just seemed insane. Like, if that was true, that would be it. Like, if I prayed and there was something there, that would be the end game.
Right.
That there would definitely be something there. Whether this whole logical thing or theological thing, or whether I was watching Harris or Dawkins or any of that stuff, I would lean back on that experience. And so and this would have been a couple years after undergrad, but my challenge to myself was, okay, this prayer thing seems like it could be the one piece where it's like, man, if you can pray and there's something there, that seems like pretty much a foolproof answer that there's something there. And if you pray and there's not something there, it's not necessarily a foolproof disproof, because you can not experience like consolations or any of that stuff, which I'm now very much deep into. But but I might as well try it. It seems worth like the next 60 years of my life to know whether God exists.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to pray every day for the next 2 years. And if something at the beginning of the
smokes,
morning,
that's quite the commitment. Not 1 week, not 3 days,
well,
2 years.
The half of this that probably was motivating this a decent bit, which I don't usually give enough credit to, but my wife takes her faith super seriously. So it was a pretty important part of my life where it's like, hey, look, is our family going to grow up?
So you were with her while you were still an atheist?
Definitely.
Were you married?
No. I would have considered myself, we got married 4 years ago.
Okay.
And so that was right when I was starting to take things quite a bit more seriously.
Okay.
But yeah, so that made it a much more important piece of like, hey, well, am I going to live my whole life like, hey, this is a family that that I don't think we're doing the right thing by bringing the kids to mass every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it going to be the most important part of my life? And she was right at the beginning. So that is what made this a little bit more pressing to figure out, because we weren't married definitely at this time when I was wrestling with this stuff. So anyway, I started praying every day for 2 years, and it really didn't work. So the parallel journey to all this, the praying every day for 2.5 years, it was 2 years or so.
How did you pray for 2 years and have it not work? I would think you'd give up after 2 months.
Well, it did technically work, but that's getting into more now understanding. But I didn't feel anything, I guess, is the answer. And you're not supposed to. A bunch of times you can pray forever. Mother Teresa prayed for a long time towards the end of her life and didn't feel consolation.
What were you praying?
I would just wake up in the morning. I bought a bunch of books on like the basics of prayer, and I would just do the, hey, thanks for stuff, sorry for stuff, help me with stuff, and rattle off what I was grateful for or sorry for or any of that jazz.
Love it.
Or I'd repeat the things that I'd memorized as a kid, which both of those prayers, not to talk them down, are beautiful ways to pray. But to me, they just felt like I was repeating something that I had memorized as a kid with no real deep thing. It was just, okay, I can say these words every morning, that's fine. Or I was just journaling to myself in my own head, which was helpful. Like, it's good to be grateful for things. It's good to try to improve your own life. It's good to ask for help where you need help. And so those things were good, but it just felt like I was just like, sitting in a journal.
It's funny you say that, because that was my objection to Christianity when I was about 16 years old. And I thought it was really good, really sophisticated. And maybe there is even a point to it. I'd hear people say, when I pray, I just feel God's presence. Yeah. And I would think, okay, but maybe that's just an oral way of journaling, because when you journal and you put your thoughts out there, you usually do feel a little more relieved, and maybe like a weight has been taken off your shoulders, something has been expressed. So you're doing that thing orally in the context of prayer, and then you call that feeling God. That was my sort of response to those Christians who would say that prayer would work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a totally fair response, and that's exactly how I felt. But I would never have said in that experience, I felt something on the other side. Mm-hmm. It just felt like I journal all the time. It just felt like I was journaling or talking to myself or whatever, practicing some speech or whatever. And there was no response. There was no relationship. There was no response or anything that I felt or I was listening to or any of that stuff. And actually, listening is an important word. In parallel to all this, the interesting thing that was happening was, for the last maybe 2 to 3 years, I had become fascinated with meditation. And so that was happening in parallel to the intellectual side and the prayer side. And I thought that when I thought of meditation, which probably the vast majority of people think of still today, I did not, tragically, first think of St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. But I thought of, Eastern traditions of meditation or secular mindfulness meditation and yoga and all that jazz. And so I was about to go to India for like 2 weeks to try to learn how to meditate. But I ended up finding one of the big meditation apps, which was Headspace. It was probably the first year, one of the first year or two that they had started, which would have been back in like 14 or 15. And Calm is the other big meditation app, but Headspace started first. And I found it was a way cheaper solution than flying to India for 2 weeks. And it was this, I thought it was this awesome tool. Like it was this super helpful way to learn this technique of meditation in the comfort of your own home for 10 minutes. You plug in your headphones before you go to work instead of trying to go do like a 2-week retreat and learn from whoever. And so I thought it was awesome. But it was essentially mindfulness meditation with some Eastern types of, the guy's a Buddhist monk, so it had a bunch of, kind of the core of it was Buddhist. But the big thing that I started experiencing was, and I probably did this for 2 years, pretty regularly, probably every day, if not every other day or so. But every time I would meditate, my mind, well, two things would happen. One, I was not alone. I was alone in the room, but I was not alone. And actually, so I was in Silicon Valley for 2.5 years for the last, before I was in Chicago. So, 2-3 years ago. And if you ask anybody who meditates seriously, you're alone there's no other people in the room with you when you're meditating. Are you alone? They all say no. There's something else there. And so that was the first weird thing. And the second weird thing is in mindfulness meditation, you meditate for a while, you focus essentially primarily on your breath, and then you let your mind go. And whenever I would get into a place where I would stop distracting myself with YouTube or Netflix or all the things I had to do or all the worries in my relationship and just try to actually focus on something simple in silence, my mind would strangely be pulled towards something spiritual, something Christian, the Trinity, an image of the cross, the Holy Spirit, dove, whatever it was. And I still would have called myself, this was in parallel to all this, and I still would have considered myself probably agnostic at that time. And that was very strange that all these things were, it felt like a pull towards something spiritual and something Christian. And that kind of happened in parallel to this whole prayer thing, and I just had never connected them. And so I started talking to priests, brothers and sisters, monks, folks who I knew, and asking, hey, is there any intersection here between this meditation thing and this faith thing or this Christianity thing? And you're smiling now, but they all laughed at me and said, yeah, we've been doing it for 2,000 years. You probably should have heard about it. It's called prayer. And I was like, wait, no, I've tried prayer. Hey, thanks for stuff, sorry for stuff, help me with stuff, right? And there was a priest who I was talking to who honestly changed my life, but it was just a phone call for like 15 minutes, and I was talking to him about this. I was like, look, I know what prayer is. I've tried praying for a while, and it's just, you're repeating stuff or you're just journaling in your own head. And he was like, yeah, imagine if you came home every day to your wife, and your only interaction with her was, hey, honey, I'm thankful for these 3 things that you've done. I'm sorry for these 3 things, and I need your help with these 3 things. And then you went to bed. How healthy would your relationship be with your wife? And I was like, it'd be really unhealthy. He was like, yeah, exactly. What do you do most of your relationship? And I was like, I listen most of the time. My wife likes to share. I don't love sharing. And so it's awesome for both of us. I say, hey, how was your day? And that's pretty much most of the conversation. And then I listen. He was like, yeah, now imagine instead of talking to your wife, you were talking to the creator of the universe. Wouldn't you want to listen a good bit more? I was like, that seems like a fair enough argument, but I don't even know what that means. What does it mean to listen to God? And I started learning all about this rich, beautiful tradition of meditative and contemplative prayer within the church. And things like Lectio Divina and Benedictine spirituality, Carmelite spirituality and recollection, Ignatian spirituality and imaginative prayer, chant, all these really beautiful ways to pray meditatively and contemplatively. And I sat down one day, Googled how to do Lectio Divina, which is meditating on Scripture, and randomly opened up past the Bible to Matthew 6 and meditated on Our Father, Christ teaching the Lord's Prayer just randomly. And you pick, in Lectio Divina, you pick a word or phrase or image or whatever that sticks out to you, and you hold that in your mind and meditate on it. Not, in mindfulness meditation, you focus on your breath, and in Lectio Divina, you focus on Scripture and a word or image from Scripture. And it just, that experience just completely changed my life, brought me to tears, brought me back to my faith, is the most important part of who I am, obviously, is what I'm doing with everything, changed everything about my wife, my family, everything about what I value. And it was just this, as hard as any like real prayer experience is to put into words, but it was just this beautiful combination of this deep sense of peace, which you get a little bit of it from secular meditation. Like you're meditating and your stress goes down, you breathe deeply for a while and you feel your stress go down. So it was this sense of peace, I would argue deeper, but combined with like this depth of meaning and like real meat to it. So what does hallow mean to make holy? Is Jesus hallowing God the Father's name? Is God the Father trying to hallow my life? Am I letting him make me holy? Am I growing in holiness? Am I supposed to be helping other people grow in holiness? Am I serving other people in any way? And the answer to that, I was in a secular career doing stuff mostly for myself. And the answer to all those questions were no, like I must be doing something terribly wrong with my life, which are big, stressful questions to wrestle with. But I was wrestling with them in this deep sense of peace. And so it was just this life-changing experience where it was like, wow, this really feels like there's something, And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm crazy, who knows? But it really feels like there's something on the other side here that I'm having a relationship with. Like, it's not just me talking to myself. I'm getting things out of this, and prayer isn't something you're supposed to get stuff out of, but I'm getting things out of this that I didn't have before. Like, I'm not just talking to myself. There's something else here talking back to me. And it was Scripture, and it was through Scripture. But
you said this happened in parallel to those 2 years of praying daily. Where in the 2 years did this thing start happening?
Right towards the end.
Okay.
Yeah. So, or probably about a year in.
And then before you go further with your experience with Christian prayer, you talked about using Headspace, and that was cheaper than spending 2 weeks in India learning how to meditate. Yeah. But did you go anywhere? Like, did you go to any Buddhist temple, or did you seek anyone out to help teach you how to meditate, or was it just Headspace?
No, it was just Headspace that I used to learn how to meditate in the Buddhist tradition. In the Christian tradition, obviously, there was a lot of learning that's gone on over the last 3 years or so. And there was a big silent retreat that I did after kind of this, shortly after this experience, which was with Christian monks in Detroit, but which was equally life changing. But no, I mean the Headspace guy, Andy, is a former Buddhist monk, was in a Buddhist monastery for at least 10 years, I think. And so he just walks you through in a very similar way that the Hallow App tries to do with Catholic contemplative meditation and prayer, but walks you through different types of techniques that you can learn how to pray and meditate in the same way that you would if you went to a teacher, in a personal way that says, hey, you're going to go through this journey of 10, 20 things. And I was using it, meditating every day for just easy 10, 20 minutes or so at the beginning of the day for probably 2.5 years. But those 2 years probably happened, like the second year of that was right during the first year of prayer. And so right kind of 1 year into that prayer challenge that I had for myself is when I started having most of these questions. I haven't necessarily drawn up all the timeline of that, and it always gets fuzzy, but that feels generally right when around that stuff started happening.
End of the 2 years, are you dating your wife? Are you married to her at this point?
Yeah. So. And
what was this like for her as you came closer to Christ? And
yeah, I mean, she's always been, she's just as is my mom, just a way holier person than I am, just way more selfless, way more thinking of other people, and has always taken her faith super seriously, has never really wrestled with it or any of that stuff. And so her big thing was, hey, this is important to me. I'm going to Mass. This is what our family is going to be about. We're going to get married in the Catholic Church, all this stuff. I was like, I don't really take this stuff super seriously, but sure, I'll go along for the ride for now while I figure this stuff out in parallel. And then after this happened, everything started to change. So I started going to Mass all the time, confession, rediscovered the beauty of the sacraments, adoration, all this stuff. And I think generally it was a very positive thing for her. I started trying to be a better husband. It would have been right around the time that we got married, honestly. So I was trying to think exactly when it was. I know I took my faith pretty seriously at our wedding day. So this would have happened, maybe a month or two before, or right around that time. Yeah, because Hallow's we started working on that 3 years ago or so, and we've been married for 4 years. So it's right around the same time that all this stuff started happening. But yeah, we would. And then over the last just 2-3 years, the really cool part has been, and I'm sure we'll get into all this jazz, but just growing in my own spirituality with kind of the Hallow community, but also with her. And, going to daily Mass. We had this beautiful parish out in Silicon Valley, actually, one of the most amazing parishes we've ever been to. Just amazing confessors, awesome priests, and 24/7 adoration. Adoration just changed both of our lives. We were just being able to be close to adoration and just go there and stop in for 10 minutes, 5 minutes or whatever, has just...
So what was your mum's response to your conversion or reversion?
Well, I'm not sure either my mom or my dad took it seriously for like a year or so.
Don't get your hopes up.
Either the conversion thing or the Hallow thing. But my mom was super excited, so she just kept incentivizing it and was super supportive and wanted to help out however she could. And it's interesting because it's all kind of wrapped up in a very similar thing where Hallow obviously sprung out of this whole experience, and so the whole growth of my own spirituality is the growth of the Hallow App. And so I've journeyed with the whole community from kind of falling away from my faith to coming towards it. And so her kind of, I would imagine it's kind of difficult for her, actually. I probably have never asked her this, but because it's, I left a successful secular career to try to go do an app thing, which is a crazy idea. And my mom not necessarily infinitely supportive of like, hey, go leave this stable job to go do this crazy thing. But at the same time was super jazzed about me rediscovering my faith, as was my dad, and has always just been incredibly supportive. And so she was one of the, I went to that silent retreat in Detroit, which is where they live, and worked with her a lot after that, just telling her about stuff that happened to me and how I was thinking through it. And she has always just been an enormously helpful support mechanism. So
I think it was Fulton Sheen who said that when the church drops something, the world picks it up. So we kind of got rid of our rosary beads. Hopefully we didn't, but I mean, Catholics often kind of dispense with tradition like that, and then all of a sudden you see people wearing rosary beads, hanging them around their windshield, even if they're not Catholic. Something similar perhaps with Gregorian chant. I mean, there's all these kind of the equivalent of lo-fi hip-hop YouTube stations for Gregorian chant for secular people and that sort of thing. But then often what happens is once the secular culture picks it up and almost kind of claims it, Catholics are then really afraid sometimes to adopt it. So mindfulness would kind of be an example. Like that's like the latest buzzword. So then when you say, well, actually there's something good here that maybe we've forgotten about, Catholics can be a little allergic to adopt something because that 100%. Seems worldly. So I guess my question for you is, with this Headspace app, what was it that was, and what is it that secular people are seeking that's actually genuinely good? Start there, and then maybe kind of share when it was you perhaps started to move away from that Headspace app and why.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm incredibly indebted to, obviously, all of the meditation apps and Headspace in particular for bringing me back. They didn't bring me back to the faith, which is funny to say for a Buddhist app, but we're definitely an important piece of that journey. And so I'm big fans of, owe them a lot in terms of my own experience. And I think the thing that gets us really excited about the world is I think there is a really deep, like you said, a really deep hunger for whatever it is that these folks are offering. And mindfulness is one word, meditation is another word. Meditation has and always will be like really core to Christian faith. Mindfulness is a different word with different meanings depending on who you talk to. But the thing that gets us really excited is I do think it's a hunger for two things, which are essentially the same thing, but peace and spirituality. And I think, as a church, we do an awesome job, and as lay people in the church, we do an amazing job, especially over the last 10, 20 years, of leading with, and I think you do an awesome job of this, of leading with the truth and the theology and the philosophy of our faith, and proving to folks like myself 5 years ago that, hey, there's actually people who are smarter than you who have thought through this. And I could talk circles around you in 3.5 seconds if I wanted to, logically, on why this is true. And that, I think, is like the depth of the beauty of the philosophy and theology of the faith is super important. And a lot of people are really hungry for it. I think on the other side, though, we also have, and so that's the truth, but we also have this deep peace that comes with the faith and through the deep spirituality of the faith. And I think we don't often, and whether you can or not is something that we're trying to figure out with Hallow, but we don't often lead enough with, hey, we also have this deep sense of peace in our faith, and joy and happiness, but this deep sense of peace. And like you talk to, my little sister is in college right now, my littlest sister, and she probably gets, no joke, 200 notifications to her phone every minute. And
what?
Yeah, I mean, it's just Snapchat or Instagram. Anybody who has I think she has
awful way to live.
I think she probably has 100 Snapchat streaks that she keeps.
Stop it! Stop it, Alex's
so
sister.
Stressful.
If she's watching.
It's so stressful. I mean, it stresses me out. I held her phone for like 3 seconds, and I'm like, I can't do this.
Just you talking about it is stressing me out.
I know, it stresses me out when I get like 2. But that points to, and there's a ton of documentaries on like Facebook and the big tech and all this stuff that are just driving so much anxiety and so much stress, especially in young people's lives. And at the same time, and so there's this hunger for, man, can I just get away? Can I just have some peace? And I think that's a lot of the meditation apps are hitting on that. Like, hey, just take a break, which is awesome. Like, take a break from scrolling through your feed and getting jealous of everybody, and just sit in silence for a little bit. And yeah, we'll tell you to focus on your breath because that's the core of this technique, but just sit in silence. And that sitting in silence is an awesome thing. The other piece of it is and I think this data is decently old because the Pew study was like 2012 to 2017, but the percentage of people in the U.S. who identify as religious was 65% in 2012, and in 2017 it was 55%, which is crazy. That's a 10-point drop in 5 years, which is insane and super sad for religious folks, which I now consider myself. But it has not been replaced with a rise in atheism and agnosticism when you include the option spiritual but not religious in the survey. So it essentially is taken up by a bunch of people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. And I think there's two important pieces there for us to think through. One is like, well, what does that even mean, being spiritual but not religious? Isn't this just like a cloudy definition of terms? And you can get into theology of what is religion and community and belief, and everybody has a theology and all the stuff that you should get into intellectually. But the other side is, okay, yes, you should fight back against that. But on the other side, what are they hungry for then? What are people actually looking for? And if it's spirituality, it is a personal relationship with something outside themselves, which is God or something, the universe, whatever you want to call it, but some type of spirituality. And so I do think mindfulness and mindfulness meditation and the big meditation apps, Calm, Headspace, are hitting on those two things, like this hunger for peace and this interest. For me, it was much more an interest in spirituality. Like I was stressed and anxious, but not necessarily more so than the average person, I would imagine. But this fascination with spirituality and a contemplative life, or whatever that was, fascinated me, which is what brought me to meditation. And I think those two things are both, peace and spirituality are both very good things. But I mean, to your point, it's not all good. So there's a bunch of differences between Catholic meditation and Christian meditation and contemplative prayer and mindfulness meditation and secular meditation. And it's not a new thing. Cardinal Ratzinger wrote a letter, I think it was 1969 or 79, and about, hey, there are some dangers to secular yoga and mindfulness meditation. There's philosophical differences, like the biggest one being in Buddhist philosophy versus Christian. In Christian philosophy, you have good and evil. And so if you sit there and you just let your mind go, either something good could come and give you thoughts or something bad could come and give you thoughts, either Satan or God. And you have to be able to discern spirits, Ignatian spirituality, discernment of spirits. And in Buddhist philosophy, you have just a focus on detachment. So not necessarily the same discernment of spirits, which then the big danger there is, well, you could have something evil come into your mind. The other thing is, if you're focused on just breathing, and just trying to better yourself, just like anything. Like if you exercise a lot and you get in really good shape, you're going to have a little bit higher ego. Like you're focused on yourself and making yourself better, and so your ego is going to get a little bit higher because you're in better shape than you used to be, and then more shape than some other people are. And the same thing with meditation. If you feel like you're in this like contemplative state, your ego will increase in the same way of like, hey, I now feel like I'm more at peace.
Right, whereas within Christianity, it's like your prayer should grow in relation to your selflessness and love of neighbor, right? So if I'm like having some apparent mystical experience and then I'm, just abandoning my children or not caring about my wife, not anticipating her needs, that's a pretty good indication that maybe what I'm experiencing is something other than, a growth in prayer.
Yeah, I mean,
Thomas Dubay talks about that in The Fire Within. I don't know if you've ever read that. It was a beautiful book. He talks about the contemplation and then kind of growing in holiness. But
I mean, the only prayer is either effective or not affected by the fruits of prayer. So if you love more in your life, then you're praying well. And if not, then it doesn't matter whether you feel super at peace or whatever in the prayer if you're not loving more, and vice versa. If you're loving more, like Mother Teresa, who struggled with dryness in prayer for a lot of her life, the important piece was that she was being charitable with her life and with her actions. The last piece I think that he calls out is that you can confuse spiritual consolations with, in a state of sin, to get confusing messages. So you could be in a state of mortal sin or sinning often, and then you could get spiritual consolations from meditation and then confuse them as like, hey, I'm doing the right thing or whatever. Whereas Christianity has this whole built out, like, well, you've got to work on the sin thing. And, spiritual consolations and desolations, whether you feel good or you feel bad coming out of prayer, have different interpretations based off primarily the fruit to which those lead to. So whether they lead you to more love or not. And so those things, when you just look at secular meditation without the context of faith, you have those, risks or dangers of falling into. And the last thing is, he talks about this a decent bit, but they're rooted mostly in Buddhist philosophy or Eastern traditions of philosophy, which mean that often, like you'll be and I don't do yoga, although I should stretch more, but those philosophies seep through a lot of the stuff that you're meditating on, which oftentimes are in conflict with Christian philosophy. And so when you're meditating in a Christian context, obviously the Christian philosophy shines through. And so you've got to be careful to say, hey, if I'm actually just focused on my breath, just trying to do this, there's a handful of meditation apps that are like, we're going to get rid of any of this Buddhist stuff and we're just going to do breath-focused stuff. And it's like, yeah, but even then, philosophy is always going to shine through in some way. And so the big question is, okay, well then, if those are the dangers of mindfulness meditation, what is Christian meditation? How is it different? And there's a bunch of different ways to meditate. Obviously, the Rosary is a beautiful one, but there's a ton of different ways to meditate. Lectio Divina, obviously, for my own life, Ignatian spirituality, the Examen, imaginative prayer. But the question is, how is that different from mindfulness meditation or just secular meditation? And it's essentially like all of it, the why, the what, the how. But you're doing it for the purpose of growing closer to God, to walk with Him, to carry His cross. The how is you're meditating. The core of the meditation always has to be Christ or God or the Trinity, but always has to be God. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be Scripture. That it can't be, you take a few deep breaths at the beginning of a meditation for sure, get into whatever space is comfortable, but then the core of whatever you're meditating on has to be God. Mm-hmm. And the mysteries of the Rosary has to be what you're meditating on in the core of that meditation or any of that jazz. So and then the last thing, like you said, is what it leads to is hopefully, and what it should lead to, and what you should pray for, and what you should work on in that prayer is dying to yourself, not growing an ego. So you're trying to balance that. Yeah, you're becoming more prayerful, which leads to more ego, but at the same time, you're praying about, a litany of humility. You're praying to become more humble, or you're praying to become a better father or a better husband. And so the fruits of the prayer are what are the important pieces of that. So anyway, that's it definitely, I agree with you. Like the Christianity has had meditation forever. And so for folks, especially young folks, when you say, hey, do you want to meditate? Nobody will think you're talking about Lectio Divina or Christian meditation, which is hopefully will change in a few years with Hallow.
I think the reason I was attracted to meditation as a 15, 16-year-old is because I did desire something deeper in my life. I mean, I went through a stage of solipsism where I wasn't sure if other people existed, and it was kind of interesting having chats with people I thought may not exist. But I remember I want to be interested in things that I should be interested in. And I had these deep thoughts, about the world and who I was and things like that. And I think the reason I was attracted to Buddhist meditation or New Age meditation was in part because I got the sense that there was going to be no moral demands laid upon me. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I think for me it was like, if I go Buddhist or if I go something New Age, no one's going to tell me I can't have sex with my girlfriend or masturbate, and I'm really cool with that. I don't want that. I want the bliss of heaven, or call it what you want, but I don't want hell. I don't want Satan, and I don't want people telling me what to do. And I don't know what you think, but that was something that kind of stood in the way of me embracing Christianity in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's a lot harder path than the other one. So, if you have moral demands, or your whole life has to change because of what you took from prayer, that, having to leave a career and do something else, which has been an enormous blessing for me. But having to do things like that, having to pick up your cross, having to do the dishes at night, if you pray and you meditate and you're like, man, I really should do the dishes. That is a much harder path to follow. So it's a lot less attractive initially. But I think the question is not, what are the consequences, but what is true? So, and not to get too far into the truth piece, but I think, and I was talking about when folks are meditating in the secular tradition of meditation out in the valley or any of that jazz. And now I ask, hey, okay, so you're meditating, you're alone in that room, but there's something else there. You focus on your breath for sure. You're not going to get any life change. You go for a run and you're not going to get any hey, I have to change my whole life because I went for a run. I have to do something totally different. But when you're meditating, there's something different because you're thinking. But you sit in a place of stillness and silence, and there's something else there, and you feel like there's something on the other side. Mm-hmm. It's similar to my experience of being pulled into something. Yeah. So the question is not, well, if I believe this Christianity thing, then I have to do all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, just be quiet, sit down, be silent for 10 minutes for sure. Do whatever it is, just be silent for 10 minutes. I would prefer the structure that, of Lectio Divina or any of the stuff that is the right structure to make sure you're on the right path. But then just listen for whatever that thing is and whatever it's telling you to do. My guess is God is a lot better evangelizer than I am, and he will do a lot better job telling you about the Eucharist than I ever would, and telling you to be a better father than I ever would. But don't just sit down, be quiet, but take seriously the thing on the other side. So it's not, hey, all these rules that come with the Catholic Church, which I feel like the sad part about the state of the church today is when people do think about, hey, should I be a Christian or not? It's like, well, but there's all these rules and there's all these things I have to do, and I don't really want to be a Christian in a world with all these rules. And it's like, well, get to the rules in a bit. Yeah. They're important, super important.
But you could even say, if you were just experimenting or open to Christianity, I guess you could say, well, maybe some of their rules are wrong. Maybe they're not. I can shelf that for now, and just as you say.
Yeah, just discover it for yourself. Like the scientific approach is just to say, okay, well, if there's a God and I'm supposed to be able to talk to him, I should probably try to ask him myself. Yeah. And so then the question is, okay, what is the framework with which you go about and ask those questions? And I think, in the Hallow App, like the first intro 9 days or whatever is trying to introduce you to different frameworks to try to wrestle with that. But the core is just, hey, take 5-10 minutes every day for a little bit and just sit in silence. And my bet is there's something on the other side, and it's going to be the same thing on the other side that is there when I'm there, and it's going to tell you the same stuff that it's telling me. And he's going to bring you this deep sense of love and peace, but it's not going to be easy. It comes with all these not demands, but all these things that you're going to have to change about your life.
I love it, yeah. What I love about that is I think often we pray like adding another app to our phone. But what you're talking about when you say sit down and shut up is take apps off, to use a silly analogy, but like do less. Sit in silence, because often I think we want to grow in prayer or see if God exists. We just add another thing to our already full plate. Sounds like what you're saying is like just scrape the plate off and sit.
Silence is just so important, and it goes back to the listening thing, which is you can pray for, and you should, ultimately in a full prayer life, do a bunch of different prayers. You can do the rosary, you can pray with chant, you can do the examen, you can do a bunch of different prayers. But the core of it and the challenge, I guess, with the Hallow App is, why don't you just sit in silence for 10 minutes and see what happens? Mm-hmm. And do that for a while. Like, you can't just do it once, and it's hard. Like, sitting in silence for 10 minutes, especially hard for me. Like, you whatever, 2-3 years ago, you got YouTube, you got Netflix, you got podcasts, you got all this stuff that's like, well, I kind of want to, or you got a bunch of work you got to do, or a thought comes across your mind. It's like, well, just sit in silence for a while and see what happens. And my guess is it'll lead you to the same thing that it led me to. Okay, so how did you begin thinking about creating the app Hallow, and how did that happen? Yeah, so it's an obvious idea at this point, right? It's God essentially hit you over the head with it, which is always funny. Like, so how'd you come up with the idea? It's like, I didn't come up with the idea, I just finally did it. But and I didn't even do it. The joke I make is the only two things I ever did right in my life were ask God for help and ask other people for help. And I tried to code the first version of the app, and it was absolutely terrible. But so this experience happened, and I was, there's a bunch of stuff out there on how to do Lectio Divina or Ignatian spirituality or all this jazz. But I really liked this format of feeling like you had this personal guide on your phone that you could take anywhere, that could lead you through in an audio guided way these different ways of meditation, and you could learn it. And I was going to use something like the secular meditation apps for the rest of my life. It was there, definitely. And I had just experienced this thing that had by far changed my life, and I needed now to pray with that for the rest of my life, and I needed to grow as deep in that method of prayer and meditation as possible. And so I needed something to help me. And so really it was essentially 100% selfish, which was, look, I need something like this, but with totally different content, to help me to practice this for the rest of my life. And it feels like, if I take a couple months and try to work on this thing, and it helps me a little bit get into heaven, just me, that seems like a positive ROI. I had never really learned how to, I knew how to code a little bit from undergrad, and I took but I didn't know how to build an app or any of that jazz. So I asked a handful of friends who were way deeper in the theological and spiritual side than I was to say, hey, do you guys know any of this stuff? Can we help work together on some of this content? And they were like, yeah, super happy to help you in my spare time with your crazy idea, Alex. And then I knew a couple of engineers who actually knew how to code, and I took like a class online for 2 weeks and then started coding it. And it essentially just played and paused like 9 different sessions. And actually the interesting thing about the very beginning was, so we built this beta version of the app, and you launch it in this private thing to like 100 people, just friends and family. And we had 9 sessions on the app. Essentially, what we called Christian meditation, which is really a sort of Carmelite recollection, the Ignatian Examen, and then Lectio Divina. 3 sessions of each, 9 days, 9-day intro challenge. And we had this little thing that played and paused, and you could have a little journal after it. I coded it. It was absolutely terrible. It looked terrible. It was the worst app I've ever seen in my life.
I'd love to see it. I'm sure you have
I have
screenshots.
Pictures, man. Our new engineer came on and deleted literally every line of my code because he said it was so terribly written. But our big theory was, okay, we're going to not launch this thing. We're going to share this with like 100, 200 people of our close family and friends. Because as we were building it, I was talking about this and my friends were like, well, let's see, I'd love to check it out, whatever it is. And it's like, okay. But for me and for everybody else, the big question was, okay, we're going to do these 3 types of prayer or meditation. And we're going to see which one is the best and which one people like the most, and then we'll build a Lectio Divina app, or we'll build an Examen app, or we'll build a Carmelite app, or whatever it is, or a Recollection app, or a meditation app. And we did this little test. We talked to like 90 people, which there was a bunch of crazy stories in this, but everybody loved one or two of the 3. And we're like, the others are just total trash. Like,
Okay.
don't do those. So I loved Lectio Divina. The others, I don't know why we wasted our time for the first 6 days. Or man, the Examen was phenomenal, but it was an even split, 33%, 33% on who loved which one. So it was like, man, but I mean, it does get to the point, and something that we've tried to build around for now, which was the big learning, was everybody prays and comes to God in unique and differentiated ways. And even for me, like I get way into the rosary for a while, or way into the Divine Mercy Chaplet, or way into just sitting in silence for 30, 40 minutes. And then you kind of add them or combine them, or, the Examen is super powerful, the litany or whatever it is, or just reading scripture, or just listening to scripture. And so everybody kind of, the big learning there was everybody kind of prays in their own way, and to try to build something, which I think is the exciting part of what we're doing, but to build something where anybody, whether you're having a holy hour every day, you're a priest, you've been a priest for 20 years, or you've never prayed before in your life, can come into the app and say, okay, I can get started somewhere. I know where to begin. And the cool part, I guess the coolest part about that super beginning piece was one of the women. So it was still a big question of whether we were going to do this, whether people wanted this thing or not, whether it was worth doing for anybody other than myself. And one of the women we talked to was in college. And we talked to her at the beginning of the 9 days, the middle of the 9 days, and the end of the 9 days, and just interviewed her like we did for everybody. And at the beginning, she was like, look, honestly, I'm kind of struggling with a bunch of stuff in my life right now, and I don't really know what God's asking me to do. And so it'll be nice to like try this thing out for a few days. Mm-hmm. And then in the middle, she was like, man, I feel like I know what God has asked me to do. I just don't really want to do it. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. And by the end of the 9 days, she was like, you know what? I know what he wants me to do, and I know that he's going to be there with me through it. And I have the confidence to do it. And then we talked to her like 2 weeks later, and she had broken up with her boyfriend and committed to religious life. And it was like, man, just sitting in, which it was all God, all the Holy Spirit doing the work. And we were just able to be the super simple tool, literally like only could play and pause, but a super simple tool really just to spend 10 minutes in silence. And in the busyness of your life, just spending 10 minutes, if you just give God 10 minutes of silence at the beginning of your day, or whenever in your day, at night, whatever, he can change everything. And it was just such a cool thing to be like, man, okay, that seems like of the 100 people, if that was one of the person's experiences, that seems like a pretty cool thing to get to work on. So yeah, that was the beginning of kind of how we started it. And then, it took us maybe 4 or 6 months to build it and launch it. And there was a bunch of crazy stuff there, and that all was probably 2.5, 3 years ago when it launched first time for publicly.
Is that when I first saw it? About 2 or 3 years ago?
I don't know. You got involved like crazy early.
Yeah.
Which
I just can't believe how better it is now than it was then, and it wasn't bad then.
Oh, it was pretty bad.
I mean, I don't know. I thought it was good. But one of the things I always say when I advertise you guys is Catholics for so long you've heard me say this, have been saying things like, it's good for a Catholic app or a Catholic video or a Catholic, and you're like, wouldn't it be great if we just had something that was as sophisticated and robust as the secular equivalent, and it also had truth? And that's what y'all have done. Like, this is a beautiful thing you guys have done.
Well, I appreciate it. Glory to God. He has definitely done the heaviest. The coolest part of Hallow is everything good that has happened. The big fear would be, in my secular career, it was like you'd have a good meeting or something go well, or something would be successful, and you'd be like, okay, that was probably, and I probably wasn't. But now if I had a secular career, it'd be like, okay, maybe there's some God in there. But the primary thing was I did really well. Like I prepared for that. I had a model.
Yep.
It worked great. I presented it. I defended it really well. Everything in Hallow, any good thing that has happened is just clearly God. Like, and it's just funnily slapped in our face how clear it here, how obvious God's role in the whole thing is. Like we were trying to figure out the first, who would be one of the first guides on the app. So one of the voice guides that you would hear. And I was like, we had a team of like 4 or 5 folks we were talking to. And I was like, okay, we need somebody who's really deep in their spirituality, who I would trust as like a spiritual director, who really gets the content. The content is really beautiful. Who's not just a voice actor reading stuff, but really believes it. And at the same time has a super soothing voice and is super peaceful. And I was on the phone with one of my co-founders, and I was like, all right, I got to go to like a 4:30 p.m. Mass. And I went to Mass, received the Eucharist, and then went and prayed. And this guy's name just popped in my head, Francis, who's the male voice on the app. And I'd only met him once before in my life. And I called one of his close friends afterwards, and I was like, this guy I remember this guy having a super soothing voice. Isn't he doing something? And he's like, yeah, he's studying theology, mastered in theology, philosophy, all this jazz. And I was like, man, could we try to talk to him to see if he might be interested in this? And so he talks to him, my friend, not even me. And this guy comes to me. And, the job of the CEO, you would think, is like to pitch people, to get people excited and get them to join the team and all that jazz. And he comes to me and I was like, so here's the idea. Here's what I'm kind of thinking. And he's like, you don't even have to. I'm 150% into this. This is absolutely
wow.
it. And I was like, man, that is just like, and every time I try to go out and do something on our own, it just doesn't work. We like tried to reach out to, I think like Father Mike at the very beginning to try to find some partnership there, and just like couldn't find any way to connect. And then he just randomly reaches out to us like a month later or whatever it was. And so it's just really cool to get to see the Holy Spirit at work. But I do agree, like the sad part about tech in the Christian world, in the faith world, whether it's media or apps or whatever it is that they just aren't held to the same. They just don't. The UI, UX, and tech is just not at the same level as an Amazon or a Netflix or a Spotify or whatever it is. Which the content in the apps are phenomenally beautiful. Daily readings, you don't get any more beautiful than that. But like if I were to go again to a kid in college or to myself or whatever and say, hey, go download this app, they'd look at it in the app store and say, no, that was built like 8 years ago and it hasn't been updated yet. And it's like, I can't even get you to download it because it doesn't look like and it's like to your point, the content on the app is so beautiful that the app itself deserves something equally now it's never going to be equally beautiful, but at that same level where you can download and be like, this actually looks kind of cool. And then you get into the content and it's like, this is life-changing content, which it is. The rosary is a life-changing prayer. But yeah.
How do you keep this from becoming business first and apostolate second? I'm sure, that's a struggle for me. It's a struggle for anybody who's trying to make a living doing this. How do you experience that?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. It's super important for us. We have like we have a bunch of things. The first is like our primary value is the first value we have our little value statements things with our small little team, but is that mission comes first, and any of the sustainable how do you make money or any of that stuff always comes second. And
it's one thing to say that, though. It's another thing.
It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to do it. Yeah, and we have to measure ourselves against it. So like everybody on the team has it's a small team, but everybody on the team, like our performance reviews and all that jazz, all measure against, hey, how did we put mission first? The big thing for us though is centering ourselves obviously on prayer. And so any big decision, whether it's, what type of model is this app going to be, or what type of advertising are we going to do, or how are we going to fund it, or any of that stuff, we just prayed about for a really long time, talked to a lot of our really phenomenal spiritual directors. Bishop Rhodes, Kevin Rhodes, out in Fort Wayne, South Bend, so not too far from here, has been a phenomenal advisor to ours, but talk to them, wrestle with our own spiritual advisors, and then pray about it for a really long time, and then ultimately come to whatever decision that we think God is calling us to. And so far, it's been pretty obvious. Like we open up a you open up scripture and you meditate on Alexia Divine, and it's like a very obvious, like the 10 talents passage or whatever it is, like, hey, this is what you're being called to do in this situation. In other situations, you've got to make more of the content available on the free version of the app for folks who can't afford it, or you got to offer subscriptions for everybody, free subscriptions for folks who can't afford it, so have a scholarship program and all that jazz. So all that stuff is super important, but we wrestle with it all the time. I think, somebody just joined the team.
How
recently.
many of you are in your team?
Well, it was like 15-ish.
Okay, and you all based in Chicago, or?
No, it's about half in Chicago. We're closer to around 20-ish. I think we just had 1 or 2 new folks.
Who's the Sheila who does the readings?
Oh, Abby.
Her voice is beautiful.
Isn't it
Does
amazing?
she work in Chicago?
No, she's in Michigan. But
if I were you, I would make her work in Chicago. You all come in at 9 a.m, sit down, and she can say, "Welcome to Hallow."
Well, let me tell you the story.
She just speaks over you for 10 minutes.
This is the other example of, and now it's funny because half the people feel very strongly about the voices. So half the people are Team Abby, half the people are Team Francis. But the funniest thing is, so Francis, I already told you that story of. Abby, we had never, she's got a great theological background and is super, super bright, but we had never even thought that she would be a guide. And so we went to a studio in Texas to record with Francis. And Francis was, the thing about Francis is that however he talks on the app, he talks in this super meditative and peaceful voice. That's exactly how he talks in person. Like, exactly what he's going to sound like. You just put a mic in front of him. But he talks like, "Hey, Alex, it's just really great to meet you." Abby talks like I talk, right? Like just a normal human being. And so anyway, we had no idea that she had some meditative voice at all. And so we went into a studio to record with Francis. And Francis was like, "Honestly, guys, I'm pretty nervous. I don't want to go in first. I don't think I feel comfortable stepping in front of the mic or recording the first session." And we were like, "Well, Abby, maybe you just go in first, just to like warm it up for him." And so she goes in and reads the first intro day, and we all are just sitting in there and we're like, it
Francis, you're
sounds
fired.
like Mother Mary is talking to us directly. And it was just like, oh man, just
wonderful.
It was beautiful. But yeah, it was just another example of just dumb luck. But yeah, no, she does an amazing job. Francis does an amazing job. Jonathan Rumi does an awesome job. We're adding a bunch of new voices. We'll
I'm so glad you've got Scott Hahn too. He's got that great gravelly, deep voice.
Oh, he's like just like the perfect grandfather. He just feels like your grandfather is talking to you.
Hey, real quick, tell people why they should download this app. I want to know what your elevator pitch is. You get into an elevator with somebody and you're like, "All right, here's this app. Here's why you should download it." Because there's just so much to say, and it's grown so much. So what is Hallow, and why should people get it?
Yeah, honestly, you are one of the best at pitching it that we have. So I'll try to do as good a job as you do.
With an Australian accent, please.
Yeah, I do not have the accent. But no, I mean, so Hallow is a Catholic meditation app. You can download it for free on any app store. The short answer is it's a place where you can try to come and find peace and grow in your relationship with God. And we have everything. We have a ton of content now on the app. Everything from daily gospel, daily rosary, daily Divine Mercy Chaplet, stuff like just daily meditation, just time in silence, everything from like a 30-second minute meditation to an hour-long holy hour to a scriptural rosary to Gregorian chant to a bunch of beautiful content of a bunch of different types. We have music on the app. You have sleep. If you can't fall asleep at night, falling asleep to scripture seems like a better way than just the radio in the background.
Absolutely.
And a bunch of stuff on the app to try to help you to build a routine of prayer. So we just added this daily routines thing where you can say, "Hey, I want to do a rosary at 5 p.m., a Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 p.m., and it'll remind me how to do this."
That's cool.
And then a bunch of really cool content that we've added. You mentioned Dr. Hahn, who will have content not yet on the app, but coming very soon.
What will he be doing on the app?
So he'll do a bunch of really exciting stuff. But he, and we're now past my 30-second elevator pitch time.
That's okay. You did it. It was good.
But so he'll do a Bible story of Romans. So like for the sleep section, similar to yours.
He won't do like a theological exposition, will he? Because there's no way
he
I'd
just
sleep
reads
to
it so
that.
beautifully. Gosh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And then he does a rosary with reflections before each mystery, which is phenomenal. And then he will lead the St. Jude novena when it comes to St. Jude's feast day.
Fantastic.
So all those things will be on the app soon. But yeah, no, he was just there's some people, like I take 100 times. If you put a mic in front of me and you tell me to read a script, it takes me like 50 tries to try to get it right. And he just steps up and he's just like,
"Oh, I know." He's
straight
so
through it all in like 3.5 seconds. So, and it is beautiful. It feels like just like the perfect grandfather is just talking to you, and it's super peaceful at night and all that jazz.
Another compliment about your app is there's a lot of things you just mentioned, but when you open it up, it doesn't feel cluttered at all, actually. Because I know like sometimes you can look at something so much you become blind to it. So you think, oh, I understand it, but you show someone else who hasn't been looking at it, doesn't know how you built it. Like, this is super confusing. But it's not. You guys have done a really good job at this thing being very clear.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's the thing that is probably the hardest, honestly, now for Hallow, is because we're adding a lot more content, which is really beautiful content that we're really excited about. But it then, for the first person to open the app, you don't want, especially depending on where you're coming from. So this is a slight tangent, but there was somebody who was using the app who wrote us afterwards and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that the impact that your app has had on lives. My friend was terminally ill, had 7 days left to live, and had never prayed before and was intimidated to pray. And we opened up your app in the hospital room and prayed the rosary every day for the last 7 days of his life.
That's incredible.
Like, praise God. But it's... again, just an example of like such a simple tool.
It's so non-intimidating. Like, I'm even thinking, as you said that, of certain family members that I kind of want to evangelize, but I think that if I tried, it would come off harsh, or they would just block it, But it's so non-intimidating to be like, hey, you should download this app. It's a really cool way to meditate. That's so non-intimidating.
I mean, so Silicon Valley has a bunch of things that are not great about it, but they have a handful of things that they do well, really well, which is... it's called onboarding and retention and a handful of things. But onboarding is something they do really well because a lot of people download a bunch of apps and then delete them or never use them. And so the first experience that folks have downloading an app is super important. But if you extend it to the faith, it's like the church has a pretty hard time. Like, the onboarding experience for the church is pretty rough. Either I have to sit down, and there's only, I think about my own family. Probably like one of 80 people who would really enjoy me sitting down and getting into the induction argument. And
I was loving that.
I get lost like halfway into that argument. But so there's really only one person who would even enjoy that, and it probably wouldn't convince them. It'd just be like a fun intellectual thing. And then the other big two options that people identify as like, hey, what can I do to bring folks into the church? It's like, well, I could bring you to this service where we all sit around and worship a piece of bread, which is God, but to somebody who's never seen it. Yeah. Or you could go into this dark room and tell this guy all the bad things you've ever done. It's like, those are two pretty heavy like barriers to get somebody in. And so the thing that we get really excited about, and obviously like YouTube channels and your podcast and a bunch of stuff do a great job of this, but what if you could, to your point, just say, hey, why don't you download this thing and sit in silence for like 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is. Do it for like a week. And it's like, we have an intro 9-day challenge. Just do the intro 9-day challenge. Tell me what you think. You can do it over the next year or whatever. And it's just a way easier way to be like, I've fallen away from my faith, but the app is actually pretty interesting. And we've had people...
Can you gift the app for someone else? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, we have gift cards that you can get online, or family plans.
Okay, good, because I've got a few family members I want to gift this to.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
What's the goal here? Because I'm sure you've thought about this a great ton, obviously. Like, is it just about stuffing more content into the app? Is it about making the app more user-friendly? Is it about extending the reach? Maybe yes to all those things. I don't know. Like, where do you go to from here?
Yeah, I mean, the important part for us, it's a really easy, the model of it is really easy, which is like if you're, it's actually really, there's a free version of the app that has a bunch of free content that anybody can use, and the goal of that is that there's enough content on there to use forever for free, and then there's a subscription version to unlock a lot of really awesome content, like your Bible story at night and a bunch of really awesome stuff. But the really nice part about the subscription model, and we thought about, hey, would we try to make this free and support ourselves with ads or donations or subscription? And the really nice part about the subscription, ads try to, like a Facebook app, is incentivized to keep you on there forever because it can sell more ads. But Hallow, all we really care about is that we're adding value to your life consistently over time. You don't have to use it like 20 times a day, although there are people who use it. I think the record is like 30 times a day for 100 days or something crazy, who is actually an evangelical Protestant, the power user on the app. But all we really care about from just the pure like mechanics of the app is we want to reach more folks and we want to have retention. You want to add value to their life so they keep using it. And that's, from a mission perspective, the exact same things. You want to reach new folks, the whole world, at the end of the day. And you want to add value so that folks can grow as deep and as close to God as possible so that you have as many saints as possible. And so those two things are are exactly the same. Now there's a bunch of trade-offs, like, we want to offer free content and free scholarships and all that stuff, but those are really the two goals, which is how do we grow and reach as many people as possible, to really try to, I do think there's a lot of people hungry for spirituality. And if you could imagine a world in 5 years where when people thought of meditation, they thought of St. Teresa of Avila, that'd be a pretty cool world. Or when they thought of great tech, like really well-built tech, they thought of Catholic tech, that'd be a pretty cool world. But at the end of the day, it's just people are hungry for peace and they're hungry for spirituality. And so trying to reach out to those folks and folks who have fallen away or who are of different faiths or any of that jazz and introduce them to, in an approachable way, the beauty of Catholic spirituality. And at the same time, for all the folks who are struggling day to day to try to grow in holiness, to give them an opportunity to say, hey, this is how you build a habit of prayer. We're going to try to help you build that in a community of folks gathered around you to grow as close to God as possible, to try to have as many saints in the world as possible. And so those are, I mean, the end of the day is that both of those pieces is we've got to find content for folks in every situation in their life so that anybody who's going through anything can come to the Hallow app and say, okay, this is something that I'm struggling with. We just added like a pregnancy, like a birth playlist where you can meditate while giving birth, which
wow,
I did not write, obviously, but was a huge hit actually. But there's a ton of content there, and for folks reaching out to new folks, and then a ton of content like as you journey in. We have a bunch of really beautiful prayers, holy hours, all that stuff. But as you continue to journey closer to God and deeper in your faith, continuing to provide a place for you to sit with him in silence.
Now, I created an app a few years ago. I didn't build it. It's called Victory, right? It's a way to overcome pornography.
Oh, yeah.
And so you've got like how many hours and weeks and months you've been free of porn. You get different trophies. I always joke it's the only trophy you can't brag about, but whatever. And it's pretty cool, very simple app. Nothing as sophisticated as yours. But I find myself when I'm standing up in front of an audience telling people to buy it, I want to be like, you know what? Better yet, smash your phone. Like I understand, this is evolution. This is just how we communicate now, and I just got to get on board with it. That's what they keep telling me. But do you ever feel that way? Are you ever talking to someone, you're like, you know what? Better not to get my app and just to try and live a life without a phone.
Yeah, no, I mean, all the time. I mean,
because I'm looking at the fact that you've got that watch on your wrist. You have to try to convince me why you would ever strap the internet to yourself. Everybody does this, and I'm sure it works for them. It would overwhelm me incredibly.
The primary reason that I have this thing is because a bunch of people who are using Hallow have this thing, and so we have to make sure that like notifications and everything work. But I also, I mean, it's helpful for like my calendar or the temperature outside or whatever it is. But I have it on Do Not Disturb for most of the day.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, the phone is an incredibly stressful thing, especially with the types of apps that you have on your phone. I mean, like Instagram, Reels, TikTok. I mean, they're just designed to be absurdly addicting. And it's crazy how much time you'll spend. You just open up TikTok and you're just, man, just straight addicted. And it's
so glad
obvious.
I've never downloaded that.
Don't. So I think, technology has a lot of really bad parts to it. And it's so easy to spend your day, and I used to do this all the time, where you're just watching YouTube all day or just Netflix and then work. And then you end up like avoiding family and it's all this stuff. And the thing for us that we're focused on is, yes, technology has a bunch of bad things about it, but it also has a lot of awesome things about it. Like a bunch of folks are listening to this on their phone. A bunch of folks I learned a lot about Lectio Divina and the depth of Catholic spirituality and theology from a bunch of the things that technology brought us, whether that was on a computer or a phone. And I think the truth is we're probably never going to win the battle of like, okay, let's all just ditch our phones. We're probably going to have phones for a while. So then the question is, okay, well, how do we, just like we have books for a while, so how do we enter into that space? And I think that the goal for Hallow is just like in a city. We're always going to have cities probably. But when you go through a city, you see a church in the middle of the city, you enter it and it feels like this place amidst like this stressful, busy, you see ads everywhere, billboards everywhere. It's a stressful place being in a city, or Chicago as an example. But then you go into a church and it feels like you escape and you like enter into a little place of heaven. And we have those places in our physical world, but we don't really have them. Well, we don't have as many as we should in our digital world. And so Hallow is, we should have that same thing on our phone, where the phone is an incredibly stressful place, like emails, tasks, anything, text messages, whatever it is, stuff that stresses you out. But then you have a place on the phone where you can take it over. It's the little purple guy that takes over your whole screen, and you enter into this place of peace and stillness. And I think a bunch of people have tried a bunch of different solutions. Some people have a phone in their bedroom that only has the Hallow app on it and no other apps, or they delete their social media apps or any of that jazz. But the goal of the app actually, and I think the reason I really like audio for this is that it's hard when you're like, when you open up, a prayer on your phone and you're reading digitally. There's just something about the screen that just doesn't feel super prayerful to me. Like it's hard to be like, I'm going to meditate on scripture while reading through this scripture thing.
I find that as well.
There's something about a physical book that just feels like it works a lot better there. Is a lot more peaceful. So the thing that we're really excited about with the Hallow app is it's like trying to be technology without technology. It's like, look, you're going to pick a thing, which is awesome because you have access to a ton of stuff. But you pick it, super simple, whatever and we can customize it for the stuff that will be most useful or helpful for you. But you pick it, and then you press play, you plug in your headphones, and you put the phone on the other side of the room.
So was that a conscious choice that we're not going to use video, or are you not willing to say that just yet? Because maybe that'll come down the pike.
No, definitely. I mean, the other piece of it, so there's that piece, which is like, hey, we're trying to be technology without, like, a place away from Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So a place where you can just be peaceful and close your eyes and not look at your phone. And that's the goal of Hallow. The other thing that we're trying to do is just stay as focused as humanly possible. So and I think that's the other tough part about the faith world is there's so many good things you could do. There's like so much really beautiful theology or products or books or anything, videos or any of that stuff that you could do and create. But when you start looking at some of the other religious folks who have tried to build stuff in the tech space, you end up having like 30 things that you could do or a list of 45 things. And none of them, all of them are fine or all of them are solid, but none, it feels a little cluttered, feels a little overwhelming. And for Hallow, it's just like, hey, look, we want to stay as focused as possible on doing this one thing and doing it as best as we can. And as you start to get more complex, it really does start to get overwhelming. And so we added music and Gregorian chant and Bible reflections and all this jazz. And that stuff does start to, even now, start to get overwhelming. And so it's, okay, we try to keep as focused as we can to focus on the audio experience. Now, we'll probably add like subtitles and stuff to it eventually for a bunch of different reasons. But try to stay as focused as we can at the beginning to build something as best as we can.
Man, fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you've done it. And yeah, just tell people there's a link in the description below. If you haven't downloaded Hallow yet, go do it. Try it out. Buy it. How much is it a month?
It's the annual plan is $59.99, which comes out to like $5 a month. There's a monthly plan if you don't want to commit to that much. But
and it's also just great to invest in Catholic companies. Like almost like if you weren't going to use it, who cares? Just do it. It's like I've had people say to me, I canceled my Netflix account and started supporting you because I actually would rather listen to you, and I do tend to listen to you a lot. And it's like, what a cool thing. And for myself as well to be like, I mean, I bought your app. I probably could have called you and said, give it to me. But I want.
Did you use your own code for it?
No, I didn't.
Hallow.com/MattFradd.
I don't even know if I did that. Man,
hilarious.
I should have. But yeah, it's like, my wife has really enjoyed it, and yeah, man, so good for you. Well, all right, well, as we wrap up here, any final words, any way you want to point people? Let me guess. Hello?
Well, no, I mean, and again, I would just, a big thanks to you. I mean, you've been a huge part of our journey for the last, 2 years, ever since like very, very beginning when almost nobody was downloading the app. So, and you really do a phenomenal job sharing your own experience with it and sharing it with
easy
folks.
To do when I really believe in the product. People could probably tell the difference if I don't. But I actually, it's not like I've got a billion advertisers that I have to advertise, but I really love your product. Like, I had downloaded it, was using it, and I got a new phone, and so I hadn't downloaded it. And one of the things I tend to do is block the app store, and so I delete everything that accesses the internet. So it was only about 2 months ago that I'm like, hey, I want to download the Hallow app. And that's when I bought it, right? Yeah. And I could not believe how better it was than when I had used it only like a year ago. And it was great a year ago. But yeah, so.
Well, see, even that was a better ad. But but yeah, no, so we're incredibly grateful for the partnership. And
sure, me too.
I mean, the easiest place to learn more about Hallow is just to type in Hallow, HALLOW, to the App Store, download it. There's you can do the free version, but there's a free trial to the paid version, so you can test it out for 14 days. You don't have to commit to anything or pay anything, and if it's worth it, it's worth it, and if it's not, c'est la vie. We'll try to continue to get better. So yeah, that would be the easiest place to point folks to learn more. But super grateful to be here with you and
Indeed.
for the partnership.
All right, man. God bless. Thanks so much.
God bless. Yes,
Sweet.
thank you.
That's that. That's